Hello and welcome. Today we are going to speak about T.S. Eliot's love song of J. Alfred PRUFROCK, Art Theories, Mathematics, and Praxis of Time and Space. Defying the teleological closure and understanding that le centre n'est pas le centre, the center is not the center, as Derrida said, Eliot's poem, the love song of J. Alfred PRUFROCK, belongs to the Kairos world, which, like Moritz Cornelis Esch's sketch, the gallery, the Drost effect, is a visual example of a strange loop, a self-referential system of instancing, which is the cornerstone of fractal geometry. If infinity is mathematically represented as the infinity, then we can say that the poem, the love song of J. Alfred PRUFROCK, is an infinity text. And the poem presents such an impossible structure in the mindscape of J. Alfred PRUFROCK, from where he can never escape. We can use the reference to Esch's sketch before we can elaborate on our focus of the infinity text of the poem. So this is the sketch that I was talking about. We can look at the infinity and infinite possibility, an architectural impossibility almost. While the concept of relative proportion is usually used by artists to create the illusion of depth in two-dimensional art, Escher and Eliot used conflicting proportion in their work to create the visual paradox. It makes sense to us because our brains are focusing on different regions in this picture. Each of those regions makes sense, but taken together they create an impossible situation. Trapped in the ontological time-space continuum, PRUFROCK cannot provide an epistemic denouement of his situation. Rather, he is walking up and down the Penrose stairs. It is a Penrose stairs which presents a loop in time, and therefore time becomes infinite, making the space zero. PRUFROCK cannot keep traveling inside the infinite loop, and so we are inside the poem. It is an architectural impossibility, and as a modernist, Eliot is fascinated by this Penrose stairs, which has no beginning, middle, or end. So you can see here, this you can see that the infinite staircase of moving up and down without any particular point where you understand they are disjointed. So mathematically speaking, we present Penrose stairs through the following equation. So I am highlighting the equation as it is there in Acorn's non-commutative geometry. The above equation is Korn's dimensional function of Penrose universe. Writing dn on the bracket of an, b. Using the Fibonacci sequence, it is easy to see that starting from the seed d0 is equal to d in the bracket 0 and 1, and d1 is equal to d in the bracket of 1 and 0, we obtain the following dimensional hierarchy. I can just focus it without just much of a speaking, where you can just understand the entire equation, where d0 to the bracket of 0 and 1 is equal to 0 plus infinite, which is equal to infinite. d1 is in the bracket of 1 comma 0 is equal to 1 by 0 multiplied infinite is equal to 1, and therefore it goes on in this Fibonacci sequence order, in ending with dn in the bracket of an comma bn is equal to a n minus 1 plus a to the subtext of n minus 2 bracket b n minus 1 and plus b n minus 2 is the infinity is equal to 1 by infinity and n minus 1. So you can just look into it. Yes. By complete induction, by complete induction, one finds that dn is equal to 1 by infinite n minus 1. We obtain an exceptional Fibonacci sequence where f infinite, that is f phi, into the bracket n is equal to bracket, we can open set infinite 1 plus infinite, 2 plus infinite, 3 plus 2 infinite, 5 plus 3 infinite, and as it goes on. The nth Fibonacci number is given by the formula which is called the Binet form, named after Jacques Binet. I'm focusing on the Binet formula, where infinity, that is phi minus 1 and minus phi, are the solution of the quadratic equation x square is equal to x plus 1, and we can see the next figure that I can bring about to you. x1 is equal to root 5 plus 1 by 2 is equal to 1 by infinite. x2 is equal to 1 minus root 5 by 2 is equal to minus infinite or minus phi. The formula of the ninth Fibonacci number is clearly identical to the bijection formula of E infinity algebra, which is d, where c is constant, n is equal to 1 to the power of infinite n minus 1. Research in the set theory has revealed since some time that there is a hierarchy of infinity with some that are larger than the others. In this section we show that there is an infinite hierarchy of empty set, that is nothingness. For this demonstration we use the formalism developed in the non-commutative geometry by A. Cons, which is in the full agreement with the formalism and the results of E infinity theory. We start from the non-commutative geometry dimension of dimensional fraction of A con, namely this is what we have as the mathematical infinity. This is the formula that tells us about the mathematical infinity. And therefore this follows, which we have already seen in the Fibonacci sequence, where A and B represents classical Fibonacci number. Consequently, we know that while d to the power 0 with c constant is equal to infinite represents E infinity theory of quantum particle, the empty set d constant c to the power minus 1 is equal to infinity 2 represents the quantum wave or the surface of the particle. What we see here is an impossible structure which defies the architectural laws of physics and creates the Drost effect, the world of centerless free play, where Derrida calls le jeu de la structure. In terms of quantum physics, the poem exhibits quantum entanglement represented by, as we can see, we focus on this, and the different particles are inseparable even when they are apart. Eliot's intention is therefore not to create a teleocentric poem, but rather to go on and build a loop of quantum entanglement of E infinity. And the infinity space is F3, the universe 4 plus F3, the Hausdorff dimension of E infinity space time, and we are in similar dimension of E infinity space time in the poem The Love Song of J. Alfred PRUFROCK. We can take the help of L. Mach Krajnak E infinity Cantonian space-time from the subfactor of the knot theory, we give an equation. This is the equation. The infinite hierarchical nature of x is reflected in the continued fraction of expansion as shown by L. Marek Krajnak on the connection between the limit sets of the Mobius-Klein transformation and the periodic continued fractions. L. Nashi's topological theory of high-energy particle physics and the possibility of new axion particle is as we can see from this equation. So, it is not only the readers but the critics who are engrossed in understanding the sign to interpret the whole of the poem. All of us are in a kind of a wormhole where we cannot understand much of the signified. In Derrida's terminology, the poem supersedes the alternatives of presence and absence, and there is no need to be concerned with the absence of a center or of origin. Actually, sitting down to write the paper, I find the proposition of this axiomatic applying certain postmodernist theories to a literary text is paradoxical. For we do not need such an application. Why not talk of the beauty of the complexities produced by this infinity text? And I do not mean the beauty in terms of aesthetics, but as an Archimedean observer. So I want to point out that Eliot does not wish to give us any teleological coordinates, but rather an ontological revelation that the master text is neither following the canon nor defying it. It is not typically postmodern, which is another mode of cooptation of alterity. Rather, his infinity text grants us zoisa, within quotes, which can be located beyond the symbolic. The Penrose Stairs, however, is unique, and so is PRUFROCK's internalized ontological hell, in that it makes possible a continuous and uninterrupted ascending or descending. We can therefore observe an aesthetic similarity between Eliot and Escher. Thus, as Eliot's poem commences in the loop, "Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table. Let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the murmuring retreats of restless night in one-night cheap hotel." PRUFROCK wants us to go, but he has nowhere to go, like Vladimir and Estragon of Beckett's Waiting for Godot, and therefore he is trapped in a psychological hell. Eliot's preoccupation with the nature of self is central to a reading of PRUFROCK. The poem questions the notion of the self as unified entity. At every stage in the poem, the self that PRUFROCK reveals appears to be fragmented and elusive, and to dissolve into an assumed role. In the post-structuralist discourse, the identity is always fractured, and the simulation of coherence itself is basically nothing but an interrupted and fragmented plurality. PRUFROCK's identity is similarly fragmented, and his stability is similarly interrupted. PRUFROCK's space is one which Foucault characterizes as heterotopia. It represents countersites, a kind of effectively enacted utopia in which the real sites, all other real sites, can be found in the culture are simultaneously represented, contested, and inverted, to quote Foucault. He continues by noting the task of imagination in the conceptualization of heterotopia as, to quote, places of this kind are outside of all spaces and places, even though it may be possible to indicate their location in reality, close quote. Heterotopia, Foucault famously quips, is place outside of all places and time outside of all times. Thus, PRUFROCK space is outside the terrestrial or celestial, and the time which he is talking of is fractured and surrealistic, like the clock of Salvador Dali in his painting Persistence of Memory. We can focus on the painting. We can see that time itself has melted down in PRUFROCkian sense. This is one of the most pictographic representation of the unfixed coordinates of time and space. And this fluidity is what marks the consciousness and the unconsciousness of PRUFROCK. Time for Dali and PRUFROCK is not hegemonistic or centered in Kairos. Both of them are indebted to Albert Einstein's theory of spatial relativity to find an episteme of their unconscious in the reaction to time. His ontological imprisonment in the placeless space is the inferno. This brings us to the passage by Borges. Quote, let heaven exist, though my own place be in hell. Let me be tortured and battered and annihilated, but there be one instant, one creature, wherein the enormous library may find its justification. There is also a lack of stability as PRUFROCK cannot locate into a designated relationship. Thus, he wants to define himself with the simulation of singularity and stability. Baudrillard defines simulacra as the copies that depict things that either had no original to begin with or that no longer have an original. For him, the simulation is the imitation of the operation of a real-world process or a system over time. And simulacrum is never that which conceals the truth. It is the truth which conceals that there is nothing to conceal. The simulacrum is true. In the poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred PRUFROCK, earth is simulation and hell is simulacrum, where PRUFROCK is trapped and paradise is just a simulacra. From the very beginning, we see the individual is trapped in space of hell and cannot escape, as we see from the Latin quotation. Si io credice che mia risposta fosse a persona che mai tornas al mondo, questa fiamma starà senza più sosché, ma per io che giammai de questo fondo non torno vivo al can, si odo il vero senza tama infamia ti rispondo. The quote is from Dante's Inferno, as you very well know, which can be translated as, to quote, if I believe that my answer were to a person who should ever return to the world, this flame would stand without further movement. But since never one returns alive from this deed, if I hear true, I answer you without the fear of infamy. Eliot is aware of the infinitude of time and in hell, and he makes it evident in the poem that by entering the hell one is trapped in a black hole where time ceases to function on a linear scale, and thus there is time in the infinite heterotopian space. And to quote Eliot, we can say, and indeed there will be time for the yellow smoke that slides along the street, rubbing its back upon the window pane. There will be time to prepare faces, to meet the faces that you meet. There will be time to murder and create, and time for all the works and days of hands that lift and drop a question on your plate. Time for you and time for me. And that way he goes on.
End of the quote. Blashaw discusses this condition very specifically. This, and to quote Blashaw, we can see, this time is not the ideal immobility that is glorified under the name of eternal. In the region we are trying to approach, here is submerged in nowhere. But nowhere is nevertheless here. Il n'y a pas le place. Ici n'est pas l'ici. Here is nowhere. And death time is a real time in which death is present, in which it arrives but not stops arriving. Le mort qui n'est pas arrivé. The dead present is the impossibility of realizing a presence, an impossibility that is present, that is there as that which doubles every present. The shadow of the present, which is the present, carries and hides in itself. So, as we see that the artist that goes on is in the circular loop, PRUFROCK too appears simultaneously to inhabit two realms of reality and to be aware of a world that remains imperceptible to those around him. I am Lazarus, come from the dead, come back to tell you, I shall tell you all. Quote close. His anxiety arises from the fragmented logos. It is impossible to say just what I mean. He is alienated also because he realizes the futility of attempting to communicate his intimation of another dimension of reality to a society unwilling to listen or to understand. To quote, if one setting a pillow by her head should say, that is not what I meant at all, that is not what I meant at all. Eliot and Escher both use quantum physics and geometric laws and bend them in their artistic projection. And the result for Eliot's poem is a love song of J. Alfred PRUFROCK, and for Escher is the lithographic sketch from Drawing Hand. I would like to focus on the picture of Drawing Hands. You could just look at it. There is no beginning and the end. This is the loop, as we can understand. This is the loop as we are discussing. Here he utilizes the geometric concept known as tessellation. Tessellation states that the Math Academy are basic separation of the physical plane, supposed of closed shapes that cover the entire visual space without overlapping and without leaving gaps. Applying it to the discussion of the poem, the love song of J. Alfred PRUFROCK provides a unique lens to enjoy the various intricate themes and plot that to a better extent. We can also focus on the next very important Archimedean viewer, as we can focus on this particular photograph of Escher, where we see the narrative space and the narrator is coexisting. In the poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred PRUFROCK, we see various levels of hell. Through the imagery and language, and PRUFROCK or reader as an individual who is trapped in the infinitude of time and yet can never leave the cartographic space of reality. This duality of his existence sums up the modern hell in which he finds himself by being the anti-hero. We as a reader stand as a static force, the still life looking from the Archimedean vantage point, and are faced with a spherical mirror, as I have always pointed out in the narrative, and brings us to the next sketch of Escher, the still life. The metal sculpture of the bird with human
phase occupies the unique position called punctum Archimedes, and we are asked to take this position as readers. Thus, we are at a hypothetical advantage point outside the totality of the poem, and we are never given the scope to get inside of the center, as the poem itself is the centerless. If we want to probe into the poem, we are given two choices. We have lingered, as to quote Eliot, we have lingered in the chambers of the sea, by seagulls wreathed with seaweeds, red and brown, till human voices wake us as we drown. Either to be Archimedean observer perceiving the poem objectively, or removing ourselves from a priori and a posteriori position and looking at the poem from a different ontological plane outside the plane of the poem. So, Eliot gives us a God's eye view of ourselves and our world, removing the authority from the author and transferring back to us. Thank you.